to TMA Glass Pavilion. My name's Maura. I'm going to be your narrator. We're live streaming today, so if at any point you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the comments. We got Caitlin behind the camera. We have Jake here today. He's going to be our gaffer. And really quick, we're just going to run through all of the different equipment, just so you sort of have an idea of what we're working with today. So if I go down here, we have our furnace. This is rocking at 2100 degrees. Inside there we have a large ceramic crucible, so it's basically just a big bowl. And all of our machinery is made out of high temp ceramic and steel, but it holds about 600 pounds of glass, and we can throw cold glass in, heat it up, get it up to working temp, and then start working with it. Then we have our pipe warmer. Hot glass only sticks to hot things, so we have to preheat all of our pipes. That way we can gather up onto it. And you'll see what I mean once Jake starts gathering. He's going to work on a blowpipe today. These are made out of stainless steel, just so we can have a good handle on them. And then you see it's a blowpipe because it's hollow. Our punty rods are our other pipes, and they're just nice and solid. We got our marver table, we got our pipe cooler. If anything ever gets too hot, we can cool it down in there. Our marver is basically just a big stab of stainless steel. So we'll use that for cooling and shaping and all kinds of different stuff. Then we have our reheating chamber. You'll notice once Jake starts pulling glass out of the furnace, it's going to cool down pretty quickly. So in order for us to get it back up to working temp, we can take it back in there. And then we got Jake sitting at our bench. This is nice because you'll notice Jake has to sort of turn the entire time. So this sort of gives him a break while he's working. So Jake's going to sit, gather up some glass, give his pipe a nice preheat. You'll notice neither of us are wearing gloves, and that's just so we can have a nice dexterity. Since everything is made out of stainless steel, we don't really have to worry about it heating up too much. Stainless steel has a little bit of material, and you can see him turning and physically winding up that material onto the pipe. Okay. I lied, Jake's going to take a double dip. So he's going to let this skin up a little bit, let it cool down. When we're working in here, we're really working in layers. It's physically impossible for Jake to gather up all of the glass he needs for his entire piece at once, just because it's in that runny molten state. So we'll let this set up a little bit, get a little bit more material on top. Every time we take a gather, it basically doubles the glass in volume. Jake's gonna get one more dip. And I know this glass is glowing pretty bright, but it's actually all colorless. And we can talk a little bit about color once Jake starts applying it. But our tank is entirely colorless just because we are a public access studio. So there's somewhere between 20 and 30 artists that are using this space at any given time. And if we were to melt just one color, basically everybody would have to make blue. So we can add our colored glass separately, which is one of the benefits of the material. So Jake's going into some frit right now. And frit is basically just crushed up little pieces of glass. And we can talk a little bit in a minute about how we make colored glass. But frit is really nice because we don't have to preheat it at all. The pieces are small enough that you can just go ahead and pick them up onto a hot bubble. So you see all those little bumpies? Jake's gonna go ahead and melt those in. Is this too hot? That's too hot to pick up. I'll get the other one. Okay, I'll show him the cool one. So this is an example of frit. We got this nice little container. You can sort of see how it looks kind of like sand or candy. These little pieces are small enough that we can totally preheat them. The other thing you guys will see us use is color bar, which is this Jolly Rancher looking thing. All glass that's colored is made in a different facility. So since we are a public access studio, we purchase all of our color. There's basically 3 major companies throughout the world that you can get your glass from. We could melt an entire tank of glass here, but in order to make colored glass, it doesn't really work like paint color. We can't mix blue glass and red glass and make purple glass. We would have to tint our entire tank one color. And then that tank stays alive for somewhere between like 7 to 10 years. So if we just leave it blue all the time, we can really only ever make blue glass. And even if we fill it up with clear, eventually you get to the bottom and that blue glass stays down there. So how we actually get the color in there is by adding different metals. We leave all the hard work to chemists to figure out the colors. And then we can purchase them separately. Fret is really nice because we can get a nice painterly look to our glass with all these tiny little specks. You'll notice Jake will probably twist this up a little bit, make it a little more splotchy. Jake has a fun color today though. We have a mix of vanilla and gold aventurine. And aventurine glass happens because when you add high copper content to glass, it'll stay in these tiny little specks and it'll look sparkling. So as we start to inflate this, you'll really be able to tell. I know now it looks bright orange, but I guarantee you anything at 2100 degrees is glowing bright orange. So Jake's going to our marver table, giving it a good shape. We don't actually have any air in this bubble yet. And that's just because when Jake goes into our frit, a lot of times it can sort of disturb the shape of your wall. So we'll let this set up and then Jake can put his bubble in. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Before you put air in? Yeah. Oh, okay. Jake's gonna go into our Optic Mold, which is this guy. We use this guy to sort of make pumpkins and stuff like that. So you see it has these nice deep ridges. This sort of allows us to have a nice deep ridge. And since glass, we like to say, has a memory, right? Every time we touch it with a tool, it's gonna remember that later on. Simpler, and the thing about glass is that it's very heavily based in tradition, right? So there's a couple different molds that we can use to add a couple different textures. So Jake could turn this into a twisty face. You can do all different kinds of things with this Optic Mold. I think he's gonna do that a couple times. You're gonna twist it and go back in? Yeah. So Jake's gonna sort of change how the fret looks with this, right? Because glass has that memory. So every time he goes into the mold, he's gonna remember it. So he's gonna twist it up a little bit and then go back in, and that'll create more of a pattern. He's gonna go over to our marver table, and you'll notice he's only turning in one direction. Usually you'll notice us going back and forth, but if we turn in one direction, it actually physically winds that glass up. Gives it that sort of spiral effect. So then Jake can heat that up a little bit. You'll notice the ridges are gone, but it's still going to affect how the color is moving. It's sort of the ghost of the ridge. Jake will heat that back up. Going two more times? One more. The nice thing about glass is that we can work with it indefinitely, right? So any glass we could bring down to room temperature, bring back up, and then we can start working with it again. So Jake can do this a million times, and as long as he heats it back up, it'll be totally fine. One more time. Jake's physically letting that pool into the bottom. And now you can see those nice little ridges. So now Jake's going to smooth that out, and then we can start to introduce air into this bubble. Or I guess it's not a bubble yet, it's just a glob. We can turn the glob into a bubble. So we'll get that nice and hot, even our heat back out. Then we can start inflating this piece. And I think Jake's gonna take another dip on top of this if I have to take a guess.
Yeah, I'll do a strip.
Okay, Jake right now has like enough glass to make a small vase or like a big cup. But all of that glass that's attached to the pipette's actually gonna be waste. So we call that our moil. So you gotta think, you see that little stainless steel end right sort of where the frit starts. That's how we know where the end of the workable glass is. And when you start blowing glass, you start working in clear so you can really see the bubble, see what you're doing. But as you start moving on in your glass career, you can start to work with more opaque glasses. So glass comes in a couple different forms. We're used to seeing transparent glass, right? That's glass you can see through. So you see that on all your windows. Any sort of stained glass is usually transparent. But opaque glass is glass that you can't see through. And sort of as we're working with the glass, it gets really hot and glows that bright orange. So you can never really see through it when it's hot. So you sort of just have to learn and get used to working with an opaque glass so you can't see the bubble. Now we can put some air in this bad boy. So in our facility, we're working with soda lime glass. And glass can come in a couple different forms. Soda lime glass is our most common form. Most of your cups and like your windshields are made out of soda lime glass. Basically, the basis for all glass is silica, right? So silica is prevalent in all glasses. Basically, every rock on Earth and Mars is made out of silica. But we can add a couple different things to get it to that nice, clear, colorless glass. So soda lime glass is silica first. Then the lime part is limestone. And limestone makes it so that our glass isn't water soluble. If we were to take a piece from the ancient collection, Jake's putting a little air in this, capping the end of the pipe, and then the air is forced to go into the glass. And we'll talk about blowing a little bit later. But limestone makes it so it's not water soluble. So all of our ancient collection, if we were to stick it in a bucket of water, eventually it's going to start to break down back into that silica. So limestone's great for a piece of, it's got his air in there. We're going to let this set up a little bit. Jake's going to take another dip on top. The tough thing about working with colored glass is that if Jake loses any of this in the furnace, it's actually going to tint the entire furnace. So we got to let it set up a little bit and make sure Jake has a nice strong core. Swirly.
Very swirly. Okay.
Ready?
Let's do it.
So Jake's going to take a strip gather. And it can be kind of hard to control how much material we're getting. Because remember, every time we're basically doubling our volume. So if Jake doesn't want that much, he can use gravity to his advantage. And he just goes straight up and down, and that gravity actually pulls all of that extra molten material off. Jake has a nice wooden block. All of our tools are made out of either stainless steel or wood. Wood is really nice because it doesn't suck a lot of heat out. So we're using fruit wood. Fruit wood's really nice because it has a really tight grain pattern, so there's not a lot of sap in there. If we were to use like tools made out of oak, they're gonna go up in flames so quickly. So we keep these wood tools. This specific block tool remains waterlogged. So it allows Jake to get it into that nice Q-tip shape quickly. Glass naturally, if we take it out of the furnace and just turn it, eventually it's gonna form that shape again. But we want to work quickly, so we use our blocks. The most heat we'll ever get is straight out of the furnace, so you really want to use that to your advantage while you're working. Usually this is sort of a quick thing, so even for the demonstration, Jake's working a little bit slower than normal. If we were working on a production day, you sort of want to move as quickly as you can just to take advantage of that furnace heat. So Jake's going to get this pretty warm. What he's doing right now is really evening out the heat of that inner layer with the frit on it and the outer layer of fresh glass. If Jake starts to blow and that inner layer is really cold, the air is going to naturally want to go where the glass is the hottest, so it'll shoot to that tip. So Jake's going to give it a good heat. He's going to block it one more time, give it a nice skin. Make sure that outside is just as cold as the inside. Giving it a little bit of air. When Jake's blowing, it's sort of like a balloon, right? If we blow really, really hard and the glass is really hot, it'll actually get really thin and make this thing called cellophane glass that can pop. So we want to be nice and gentle with the material when it's really warm. Jake's going over to our marvering table. This is a good example of that glass having a memory. So Jake's working on something called bottom weighting. And you know, when you have a cup, you don't want the top to be heavy. Glass is such a fragile material. If we leave it on a shelf and like a cat bumps into it, it's totally gonna wiggle and wobble and fall over and break into a million pieces. So we gotta reinforce that bottom weight, just to add a little more insurance later on. Now Jake's got that nice and blown up. When I talk about the bubble, you'll sort of start to hear me talk about it like a body, right? Especially with the piece Jake is making. Our top that's closest to the pipe is our neck. So if you hear me talk about the neck, that's the top. And then we have our shoulder, which is just below the neck. And that's the part Jake really wants to thin out. If our shoulder's too thick, it causes that top heaviness that can cause the piece to crack and break. So Jake's gonna go ahead and pull out our neck. You can see him, he's blowing very gently, and you can start to see the bottom start to change shape and inflate. This is where it gets hot though, so I'm giving him a little paddle. And then he's putting our constriction line in. So the jacks are sort of our iconic glass blower tool. They're modeled after a pair of shears. So Jake's physically sort of cutting into that glass. And this really just tells us where it wants it to break. This is one of the core principles of glass blowing. Everything has to have a jack line or it's not coming off the pipe. So everything we make in here, you'll notice there's a nice jack line on the end of it. Now Jake's got that neck in. He doesn't really want to get that super hot yet. If he ever gets that jack line or that neck really hot, it's going to flap around a lot. And it's going to be a lot more work to turn. This is very physically demanding on your body. So you sort of want to do the best that you can in order to keep your arms and wrists nice and stable. Jake's using a little bit of gravity. You'll notice the entire time Jake is turning and sort of keeping everything on center. When you take a pottery class in the beginning, you know, you sort of do the centering of the clay. When we're working in here, we have to center the entire time. Otherwise, Jake's piece is going to be totally lopsided. So Jake's making sure his neck's nice and on center.
Take a foot.
You ready?
Yep.
We're going to put a foot on this thing. So remember the body? The foot goes on the bottom. So I'm going to make Jake something called a cookie foot, which is basically a little cookie of glass that we can stick to the bottom. The nice thing about hot glass is how well it sticks to itself. So we don't sort of have to do any like pre-treatment or anything. We can just weld this foot right onto the bottom. So I'm going to take a double dip. We'll let this set up a little bit. And if I ever stop turning, this glass is hot enough that it wants to totally just fall straight to the ground. So I'm just giving it a nice, slow, even turn. We never have to turn fast in here. Usually you just want to try to turn even. Okay, I'm taking my last dip, Jake. So I have this nice amount of glass. I'm going to come over here, go straight up and down. And you can see that glass physically pooling off. Then Jake can come on over. Grab his diamond shears as sort of a directional thing. And he can stick that patty right to the bottom. And it'll fuse pretty nicely. Jake's giving it a turn just to make sure that foot stays nice and on center. If we stick it super to the side, whoop, we can push that back on. It's just a little tag. If we stick it super to the side, we can't really fix it later on. So this is sort of a one-shot thing. Jake's gonna go give that foot some heat. And his original bubble's nice and cold. So that way we don't have to worry about it changing too quickly. We can fix that foot up a little bit. Jake's getting rid of something called heat chill. So when we take really hot glass and we put it on that cold steel, it immediately sort of ripples up and gives it this unfortunate texture. So once Jake has that heat chill out, we can go ahead and shape this up. And our foot's sort of just a nice little place for the glass to stand on. Jake's going in with his thumb and his finger and physically pushing that on there. Giving it a little puff. Don't want it to stick in there. You want to paddle up?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have this wood paddle. This is made out of that same fruit wood. And this sort of allows me to create a mold around Jake. So that way we can get nice crisp edges. Jake's gonna go on with his jacks again. I'm going on with my paddle, making sure things nice and flat.
Oh.
Jake's gonna give it a little puff.
That's okay.
Okay.
I got a flat spit.
And then we're gonna let that set up a little bit, right? Because that foot was just molted. So we're gonna transfer this onto our punty. And we could break this piece off right now. How they commercially make most of the cups you drink out of are actually through mold blowing. So they would blow something out like this, cut it off at the top, and then physically score and cut off the top of the piece, smooth it out, make it nice and even. But allowing us to punty it and flip it around is gonna allow Jake a lot more control on how he opens this up.
Ready?
Ready? So I'm gonna get Jake a little bit of glass. And this is the part where I get really quiet, just so I can make sure that I make Jake the right punty. I want it to be this nice Q-tip shape, because the punty connection is something that's designed to fail. So later on we're going to actually break this off from the punty mark. I'm going to give this a quick heat. Do you want to flash again? Boop. I'm just going to come out. I need a little ridge. So Jake's gonna go ahead and stick me onto the bottom. I'm a little hot, sorry. Oh no, it's fine. I was wrong. So Jake can stick me on. We're giving it a nice turn so that way we can make sure it's nice and on center. I'm ready. Jake's gonna take a couple drops of water, put it all the way up to that jack line, give it a good tap, and it comes right off. I'm gonna give it a quick wash, which is just sort of a maintenance heat, and then bring it right back to Jake.
Thank you.
Well, he's got a little bit of heat in that punny. He can give it a nice centering. So if Jake sticks his punny on and he sticks it on super crooked, when we actually open this up, it's actually going to open up diagonally. So Jake wants to make sure he's nice and even. And then we'll go back in our reheating chamber. So this glass was just cold enough for us to break it, sort of like how you're used to regular room temperature glass breaking. So we got to take it all the way back up to heat working temperature. So this is sort of our longest heat. And you'll notice Jake is up and down and up and down. We like to get a lot of things done fast. So this one sort of feels like forever. This is the one I always don't take a long enough heat, and then you have to get back up, which is annoying. Now we can sort to see those colors show up. And once Jake comes out of the reheating chamber, you'll really be able to see the heat difference. So it'll be glowing really brightly at the top, but it'll start to set up to its regular colors in the back. So you can see that nice bright glow. We can sort of use the glow to tell you how hot something is. What a better way to do is, Waxy, you want me to clean them? Let me find a pipe. Boop, boop, boop. What is that pipe? Are you sure? A little bit. And the glass that's closest to the pipe is always going to be the thickest, just because the front of the glass is the first thing going in the reheating chamber and the last thing coming out. So Jake's going to use that same principle we used for the jack line and create a constriction line on the end. And then we can break this off. So he's going on the outside, giving it a nice pull, going on the inside. He'll give it a good flash. We want to make sure that puntee stays nice and warm. Otherwise this thing can pretty easily fall onto the ground. And then we'll have wasted our 32 minutes working on it. Jake's giving it one more cool. Then he's going to go on with his diamond shears, which are a really nice tool for us. They cut from both sides. So we have straight shears. But you'll notice when we're working entirely in the round. So if we were to just cut with straight shears or regular scissors, it's never going to work quite how we want it to. So they invented those diamond shears to cut from both sides. So now Jake's got his nice little neck. It's nice and thin. So now we can start to open it up a little bit. I'm going to grab a paddle. There it is. And this is sort of a tough heat because if Jake makes his constriction line too narrow, we can actually overheat this, and glass wants to condense back onto itself. So it'll actually close up. But Jake's got to get it just hot enough that he can get one jack blade in there. I'll come on with the paddle, make sure it's nice and flat. And we can start slowly opening this up. If Jake goes in there and he just cranks his jacks up, it's going to leave a divot. So he wants to sort of slowly open things up. Create a nice spherical thing. So we'll do that again. Our frit mix is pretty cold, so I can show you guys that. So we got this nice aventurine happening. That's the darker color that's glowing. And then we got a nice vanilla. Jake's gonna come back on with his jacks. And he's sort of slowly opening things up. Bottlenecks can be tough because you want to be really specific when you're heating in the reheating chamber. And that reheating chamber is a really aggressive heat from all directions. So if Jake goes too deep, his shoulder will start to sort of collapse a little bit. And it's much harder in here to fix something that's going wrong than to just do it right the first time.
Just gonna do a T-top.
A T-top? Okay. Not too crazy.
I called it a little too thin to do what I wanted to do.
Whenever you hear that glass breaking in these buckets next to me, as the pipes start to cool down, that glass will actually crack off. So we don't have to do anything to it to get the glass off. Just naturally as it cools down, it falls off. Jake's going to open this up a little bit, creating something called a T-top. And it sort of makes a T a little bit. I'm going to come on with my paddle, make sure it's nice and flat. And we're sort of just creating a nice flat mold for the top. Pretty. So now that we got that T-top on there, Jake could maybe mess with it one more time if he wants. No. Once it's that thin, you don't really want to mess with it a lot, because more often than not, you'll actually mess it up. So Jake's going to start flashing this down. And remember that puntee connection is a connection that's designed to fail. So Jake will give you guys a nice look. And then we're going to start reintroducing heat into the puntee. Do you want a map gas?
Sure.
I'll go grab you one. It's okay. Remember that reheating chamber heat's really aggressive from all sides. So I'm bringing Jake this little map torch.
Thank you.
This allows him to just heat specifically the puntee. And we're going to use that same thermal shock principle that we used with the water to knock this off. Boop, boop. So while Jake's flashing that down, I'm gonna put on my super cool outfit so we can load this away into the box. You got a couple more? Okay. If Jake doesn't treat this 20 well enough, it's really easy for this thing to crack off. And then we have a nice flower pot instead of a nice vase. So what Jake's looking for is just a little bit of movement from the punchy and not from the actual bottle. And that's how we know we're ready. Jake takes these nice maintenance flashes. If we ever let the thing sit out into cold room temperature air for too long, it can really easily crack and break. So we take it to the reheating chamber, give it a nice little toasty bath, and then bring it back out. So I think after this one, Jake will be pretty happy. We can look at the color of a puntee, but those can be sort of elusive sometimes. So Jake's really looking for movement. Then we can come over to our lovely knockoff table. This just has a nice little fiber frax blanket that we can set the object on. Jake's got a nice butter knife. He's taking a little bit of water and taking it all the way up to where the puntee meets the actual piece. The butter knife is nice because it's a flat object, so you can really get in there. Now you can start to see that gold and white show up. Jake gives it a good tap, it pops right off. Then he's going to take our hot torch and melt that puntee mark in. So a good way that you can tell if something's hand blown is if it has that mark on the bottom.
Do you want to hold it while I stamp it?
Yeah, dog. Jake's going to go in with our brass TMA stamp. Brass is a nice metal because it won't get too hot too quickly. So we can give it a good stamp. And then we'll load this away into our annealing oven. So the thickest part of that object is our foot, which is the bottom. So it's probably about that thick. We'll probably cool this down for about 24 hours. Again, if we just leave it out in the room temperature air, it's actually too cold for it. So it'll crack and break pretty quickly. A good example of annealing is that large cast bench we have in the ancient gallery. That cooled down for about 11 months. So once we sort of got computerized annealing, we could get thicker and thicker glass and have a lot more control. So that's going to cool down over about 24 hours. We are still live streaming. If you guys have any questions, you can type them into Caitlin. She can answer them. Other than that, we have our master classes coming up, so look on the website for that. We have our sand casting workshop on the website, and then the galleries are open Wednesday through Sunday all week long. So they're safe. You guys can come in and visit us. Otherwise, if you have any questions, you can answer them to Caitlin. And we'd also like to thank Owens, Illinois for sponsoring all of our demonstrations. You got any questions, Caitlin? Nope. Great. Thanks you for watching, you guys. We'll be back. We're here Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So every day at 2 o'clock.